Right, very good. Well, welcome, folks. Future Work Scotland. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host for this evening, Sathpal Singh. Everybody calls me Sath. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Donald Henderson and Nicola Bennett. If this is your first time with us, very well welcome to you. If you've been with us before, welcome back. Yeah, do let us know where you're joining from. It's always good. Oh, hello from Mexico. Fantastic. Yeah, just the usual formalities. We do have a code of conduct. In short, we ask that you're respectful to one another. And everyone have a great evening, have a great experience. And our usual process for questions. So Frank's got a presentation that he wants to take us through. And then if you have any questions for him, just drop them into the chat, prefix them with a Q, and then the team and I can pick them out and relay them back to him. If he stops at any point, we'll see if he's want to take any questions. And yeah, we'll do the community shout outs at the end. So yeah, I'm delighted to welcome Frank Verbruggen to Future Work Scotland. I've known Frank since, when was it now, Frank? Early 2020, actually. 2020, early, when I did the Scrum at Scale practitioner course, and Frank was the trainer. So I've had the privilege of spending a good amount of time with Frank and learning from him. And he's a very insightful man, and he does tend to get quite deep into some of the topics that he covers, which can be great, and you will learn a lot. So very much looking forward to his perspective on servant leadership tonight. And he's also co-authored a very good paper, which I have read, with Jeff Sutherland on process efficiency. So, you know, if you can get your hands on that, I'd say it's well worth a read. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Frank to take the floor. Frank, welcome. The floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. I will start sharing the presentation. Please let me know if it is visible to you all. Yeah, good. Okay, great. So I'll be having my notes here. So just that you know, sometimes something might be screwed up, and I'm sorry for that. But I have a few notes to keep me on track, because I tend to talk for very long stretches of time, and I want to be keeping on track here. So first thing to know for everybody is that I am a developer. I have a software engineer background. I've done that for about 12 years. And in that time, I've also done all sorts of other stuff. I've done architecting, I've done Scrum Mastering, I've been a manager, and I wrote the paper. Particularly interesting about me is that I like delving very, very deep into things and trying to figure out, why is this actually a thing? Why is this important? Why is this true? And then based on where I came from, my background, I also do love trying to then regrow it back into a very clearly articulatable story. So I want all of my stories to be so relatable, so easy, that somebody who is completely not in the field. Yeah.
Frank, I didn't want to disturb you, but do you want to put your deck into presentation mode?
Do you not see it right now?
Yeah, you can, but it's not in presentation mode. So it might be easier for everybody to see your. There we go.
Okay, so you see my. Oh wait, maybe I've done the wrong sharing. Give me a sec. This is the thing. This is the thing.
Oh, you were good there a minute ago.
Yeah, it's like this, but I should be able to switch myself without you all seeing me. Do you see me switch now?
You've switched now, yeah.
Yeah, you can see that. Okay. Well, then I'll not switch. I'll do it from heart. And if I go off track, just try to correct me a little bit here.
How you could view stuff. I also got logged on to anything, and then he said, I'm blaming the fact that you
I couldn't quite get that. At any
rate,
okay,
I'm muted. I think somebody was unmuted. Sorry. On you go.
Oh, okay, no problem. So at any rate, I like understanding things in a very deep way, and I like then presenting them back to myself in a much clearer way, and trying to figure out why things go. I get some insights along the way, and I thought as to why servant leadership can be relevant to you, but also to everybody around you, would be best explained by trying to share some of the insights that I've gotten over the years, and trying to tie those insights back into why servant leadership is good. And I wanted to start with a very simple thing. Oh, geez, I thought that this would be showing up later, but whatever. So the insight number one is a Dutch phrasing. So for all of you who don't know, I'm from the Netherlands, and we have this Dutch phrasing that loosely translates into "it's better to be lazy than to be tired." And it's something that's fairly related to the concept of that it's better to work smarter than harder, except that to me, it sort of implies that there might be a lot of work to do at any rate. And if you have a lot of work to do, how should you solve it? Should you solve it in a way where you are very lazy, or should you work extremely hard to get it done? And I found this very interesting comic about a hacker. And this particular hacker had left the company, and he was literally automating everything. So he had like scripts for everything. So he had a script that had scanned the inbox from some email from a guy named Kumar, and if it said help, trouble, etc., then the script logged into the server, restored the latest backup, and sent an automatic reply: "No worries, mate. Be careful next time," which I think is amazing. I think if you automate stuff like that, it means that you can deliver the same kind of service that you would normally deliver anyway, and you would not have to spend any time at it at all. And as a developer, I've come to appreciate this quite a bit. It's in many organizations where I come, I see people and they do all sorts of work. And the first thing that I usually get involved with when I start doing the work is how much of this work shouldn't be done by anybody at all. So if you, for instance, take the evolution of how telephones work, when they were first invented and more people started using them, when you would pick up the phone and you would get a lady that would ask you, "Hey, who do you want to reach?" And then you would say that, and then they would connect you. They would plug you through, and that is unthinkable now. You would not want a phone that works like that ever, because it is work. Not only is it work that can be done automated, but because it can be done automated and so much faster, we now think that it shouldn't be done by people at all. And when I go into most organizations, more than 90, I would say 98, 99% of work that I see being done is work that shouldn't be done at all. Right? So he had a whole bunch of automating things, and one of the best ones was where he would run a script which would wait 17 seconds, then hacked into the coffee machine at the office, and then after hacking it in, he would make the coffee machine make the exact coffee that he wanted, exactly the amount of seconds that it would take him to walk from the desk to the machine, thus optimizing his walking back and forth time. Yeah, coffee is great, Donald. We love it. So how does that tie in? Well, the first realization that I want you all to have about servant leadership is that servant leadership does not say that you shouldn't do a lot of stuff or that you shouldn't make a lot of stuff. Many people, I believe that yes, Jeff. That Jeff said that something in the 50% range of people who do agile projects, for instance, believe that they can do whatever they like. That is what that means. And I'm telling you right here, right now, that is not what that means. Servant leadership does not mean that your boss is your bitch, and excuse me for my language. It does not mean that you get to do whatever you want, and it does certainly not mean that you can get away with whatever you want. If you do it like that, you will corrupt it, it will go bad. The central concept that underlies most of the things that we've come to love and most of the things that I usually think and talk about is that you want to get a lot of stuff done without having to do a lot for it. That is to say, it is better to be lazy than to be tired. So the second realization that I have is that oftentimes I come into organizations and Many of these organizations where I come in, I see that they have all sorts of processes, and lots of their processes are, I would say, suboptimal. Even when the processes are pretty good, it's very important to see that maybe they could be a lot better. So a friend of mine, he once asked a group of developers at Facebook, how long would it take you to implement a special coupon code on Facebook for Veterans Day? And they said, well, we think it would take us 2 hours. And he asked another organization, well, how long do you think it would take you to implement a coupon code? This was a web shop for Veterans Day, so that they would be able to roll that out to production. And they said, well, we think it'll take us 2 months. And you can say, well, 2 months is obviously not great. We could probably assume that that is a reasonable statement. Although I've seen many an organization, particularly a few banks here and there, that think that having, I don't know, release cycle of multiple weeks or multiple months is very decent. I've worked in a release cycle that took 6 months. I've seen 2 of those cycles and I was out. But thinking that that is good doesn't really get you much farther. On the other hand, thinking that 2 hours is really good doesn't get you much farther either. So the Facebook guys actually got back to him after a couple of months and they said, we are so ashamed. And he was like, why are you ashamed? You beat the competition by a ton. I said, yeah, but implementing coupon codes should be sort of a thing that we do so often that we should be actually much better at it than doing it in 2 hours. So we optimized it and now we do it in 15 minutes. The central takeaway there for me and for a lot of teams that I see is that it is very useful to believe that you can be 10 times as good than you actually are right now. So with many Scrum masters and Agile coaches that I see, they talk about incremental improvement, and incremental improvement is definitely the way to get there in a lot of cases. And sometimes there is this huge jump. You could almost say this huge evolutionary leap in how we do stuff. You have to do both, as far as I'm concerned, but you have to believe that 10 times better is the thing to go for. So relating this to another situation that I was in, where I had a team and they were excessively slow, to the point where at one point we implemented a feature that had been asked for 13 years ago. And the people of the surrounding atmosphere, they were so happy that finally this feature was delivered that they gave a great party. And everybody was very happy except me. And they asked me at some point, well, Frank, why aren't you happy? And I was like, well, we're a bank, we do mortgages. Either these people's mortgages is finished or they're dead because they asked for it 13 years ago. There is no way in which the people that asked for this feature have finally gotten it now are happy with this. The lead time for this feature being 13 years is ridiculous. Nobody is going to be happy with that, and nobody should be proud of that. You should believe that 10 times better is easy. How does that relate back into servant leadership? Well, as I see this, believing that 10 times better is an option for every team, and getting that mentality into the mindset of all the people there is a mentality that is necessary for servant leadership to work. If people do not have this mentality, you can be as good a servant as any, and you'll be useless. Because if you help the people get better, if you make all their problems go away, they don't believe that they can do any better. They will not change. They will keep into their set motion. So servant leadership needs this to get teams to start performing. If you do not have people that believe that it can be 10 times better, then they will never get there. And you as the leader need to also believe it can be 10 times better. Even when it can't, it is always useful to believe that you could, so that you will experiment and look for it. Maybe you won't get to 10 times. Maybe you will only get to 2. Maybe you only get to 1.5. However, statistics clearly show that as a distribution of teams and how fast they can go, the difference between the slowest teams and the fastest teams is about a factor of 2098. But that means that the slowest team does in about 6 years what the fastest team does in about 1 day. It also shows that most teams that are doing pretty decently can increase their speed by a factor of 100. And most teams that are not doing pretty decently can easily increase their speed by a factor of 300. It means that believing that you can do 10 times better is a very reasonable thing to believe as a team, as an organization. And I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward. So the question is then, how will you get there? And I think there's two very, very important ways to get there. And the first has to do with a thing that I encountered, which was called at that time, I don't know if any of you have encountered this at all. It was called the iron triangle, where they said, you have better, you have faster, and you have cheaper. Choose 2 out of 3, you won't get the third. And they told me that at the beginning of my career, which was almost some 20 years ago now. And they said, well, you can have only 2 of the 3. You can't have it all. Right? So the product can be better. It can be more of what you actually want. You can get it earlier or you can get it cheaper, but you can't have all 3. And then I started working on a couple of projects and I came to this insight that instead of believing this iron triangle thing, which seemed sort of weird to me, I started believing the opposite. You can get all 3. However, if you want to get all 3, you need to have an enabler there. And I also noticed that within the software development field where I was active, there was this term which was incredibly difficult to define and incredibly difficult to grasp. And in recent years, I've come to define the term by defining it as the core beneath all of this, which is the term quality. That is to say, your process and your software in software engineering, but this also translates to other fields. Your process and your product have great quality if they support that you deliver high quality stuff really fast and really cheap. Right? This is very important. As an interesting story there, I once had a question of a friend of mine who was growing towards a more managerial position, and he had an engineer, and the engineer was, in his eyes, over-engineering. So he was spending a lot of time, and the engineer said, I'm spending that time on software quality. And the engineer was spending an excessive amount of time. About 80% of all of his time went into doing this thing that he called quality. And then my friend called me and he said, should I stop him or should I let him do the thing where he says it's quality? Because his argument is, well, because I'm working on quality, you shouldn't want to stop me because not enough people are doing quality. And I then suggested to him, well, it depends on the effectiveness of the quality that he's making. If, for instance, one person spends 80% of their time putting in quality into the product, and then 3 or 4 people are putting in, for instance, let's say lots of features, and it works over prolonged periods of time, I would let him do whatever it is that he is doing because it's working. Right? You're getting better, you're getting faster, and you're getting cheaper, and you have the data to back it up. If, however, you do not have that data, and if it seems that the data actually says that you're not getting this, then you should probably say that he's investing too much. And you shouldn't be arguing about whether or not what he says is quality. I think it's irrelevant to call something quality just because somebody likes it or because somebody thinks that something is beautiful or great. Right? We're doing business here. The second thing that I think is truly important is that if you want to start doing any kind of movement where you change the way that people are working, you have to show them that it can be done. So if you enter an organization and you are the leader position, which is what the Scrum Master is supposed to be doing in most organizations, for instance, what the Agile coach is supposed to be doing, but also what the leaders in the organization are supposed to be doing. If you come in and you are wanting to position yourself in a leadership position, which could be any of the aforementioned or something else, you should realize that not only should you strive for this quality thing, you should also strive for actually making things great for the people and making it happen for them. So going to a serious example in my current assignment, I dropped my managerial work. I dropped my Scrum Master work that I had because I wasn't getting the results that I was truly desiring. And instead, now I started doing a developer job where I said, you know what, I know how to develop. I did that for 12 years. Let's do it again. And I started doing a development job. And as I was doing the development job, what I started noticing was that lots of people there wanted me to be the Scrum Master on top of me being the developer. And I said, okay, sure, I'll do that. But they listened, they followed, and they followed every time when I would say, okay, this is probably the way that we should be doing it. It's going to make your life better in this way, and I'll make it with you. And it's an insight that goes very well together with this better, faster, cheaper. And I would say it's something in the order of, if you build it, they will come. If you show people the way and you make their lives better, they will follow you in the right direction. I think that's a very crucial insight as well. Very close to that is the change from the inside. So what I've noticed is that Scrum Mastering as a dedicated Scrum Master for me has been very difficult. And I posted a very, very, very high-hitting post on LinkedIn about this, where I said, I think it's very difficult. And my biggest problem is I'm not a very empathetic or very nice person. Instead, I am very confrontational. I am here to try to help the team get along further. I am here to help the team improve. I'm here to make their work and their work lives better. And I don't necessarily get along with everybody. And the team that I was in particular, when I entered that team, I was not allowed to speak to any of the developers. I was not allowed to speak to anybody in the team because they were, quote unquote, always so busy. And I tried to get in the team and I tried to offer my services as a programmer because I could do that anyway. And they said, no, you can't do that. You are somebody else. You have a function outside of the team. And you're the Scrum Master, so you do your Scrum Mastering thing. And I was seriously puzzled. I did not know how to do this. I did not know how to be of service to this team. I did not know how I could provide them with any help or guidance or steer them in the right direction if I couldn't speak to them. This was insanely difficult for me. And I fought for this for months. And my first major breakthrough once again happened when, instead of trying to approach this from the outside, I approached this from the inside. I started thinking about, hey, what can I do for you that'll make your life better? And how can I make your life better in that way? And at the same time, try to curve the way that you're doing things into the right direction. Similarly to what I'm doing in my current position, at that old position, it was very clear to me that as long as I stayed outside of the team, it didn't work. As soon as I started mingling in what the team was actually doing and what the team actually needed to do, they were much more open to what I had to say, particularly if I helped them solve the problem. They get much happier with what I'm doing. So how does that tie back into servant leadership? Well, I think that there's a couple of links here. So the first is that there is a link with Scrum and a Scrum Master. So in the new Scrum Guide, if you've read it and studied it and studied the differences with the old Scrum Guide, you will notice that, for instance, a Scrum Master and a product owner are now no longer separate roles, and that the development team is no longer called the development team, they're called the developers. And the rationale for this, as per Jeff, is that what they noticed in the field was that indeed there was a big segregation between the developers and the product owner and the Scrum Master, and that there would be a separation between them, and it would give a you versus us atmosphere, and that is actually very toxic for high performing teams. So they scratched that, and they said it is no longer a role, it is now a responsibility, and anyone can take on that responsibility. A developer can take on that responsibility. In the same line, if you are a leader within an organization, as long as you start observing the organization from the outside and you try to push the buttons of a group without actually thinking about what drives the group and what's going to make them tick, and what's going to make their lives easier, they're not going to be very willing to change. You can force it through sometimes. However, it's not going to be as easy, and it's not going to be as nice for most of the people as when you instead try to look at what are they doing, how are they doing it, and how can we make their lives easier and better. I think a true servant leader focuses on what is going on in other people's lives and what is good for them. The next one, and now I'm hopping into a whole different sphere of problems and a whole different sphere of thinking about things, is that what I see in most organizations when I do my analysis of why is 99% of work that is being done so wasteful, why is there so much work that is being done that shouldn't be done at all, and why is there so much waiting time, is fear. And I found this very interesting quadrant, which has nothing to do with fear in even the psychological safety, as far as I'm concerned, is not fear, but it would actually be a different dimension here, a third dimension, which is how much fear is there in this organization? And if there's low fear versus high fear, and the particular interesting one that I saw here on the top was accountability for meeting demanding goals. If you have accountability for meeting demanding goals, you create an atmosphere where people can either start performing or they can start failing. And in most organizations, what you see is that the atmosphere that is there is they scrap the demanding goals and they start focusing on, okay, what do we need to be afraid of? This leads to, for instance, what I encountered in a couple of banks, which is a security department that blocks any and all products going live until the security department has properly screened the new software, which would take somewhere up to 6 weeks. So we would have a release, a software release. It would take us about 10 minutes to build it. And then we would have to wait about 6 weeks before it got deployed. That's horrible. Because 6 weeks later, we totally forgot everything about what we were doing. And we couldn't interrupt our own flow. So it would then be waiting and waiting and waiting. And it would be on the shelf for very long amounts of time before we would get back to it. I would also see that that there's a lot of distrust, which means that has happened an incident and people do no longer trust you. It is a situation where the organization has a very good memory for everything that has ever gone bad, and the organization doesn't have quite as good of a memory for everything that has gone well. So what you see is that if you start accumulating everything that can go bad, then the typical response is, okay, so what we need is procedure to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And you get procedure and procedure and procedure and procedure and procedure until you get a bureaucracy that is so bureaucratic that pushing through a simple change takes weeks, even though the effort that is put into that is very small. Right? So what do you do? Well, a leader needs to be able to face the fear that the organization has and take it away. A good leader, a trusted leader, is a leader who dares step in front of the danger for you, shows you that there isn't any actual real danger, but that if there was, they would protect you from it. And then they ask you, now that you're safe, would you like to do better? I've done this on many occasions, and in every situation where there is fear, even if you do not have it in title, even if you're not a leader in any kind of other way, if there is a fearful situation, if there is a situation where people are afraid of making a change happen, if you step up, if you say, I will stand in front of this fear, I will protect you, and we're going to try to face it all together, and we're going to try to make sure that we resolve this fear, and we're going to try to prevent the organization's memory for this fear for our situation. There's a couple of things that happen. So first off, you immediately get the recognition that is the recognition that fits with a leader. You immediately get the instinctive reaction that everybody thinks, okay, if you're willing to put your head out, and I'm not in the greatest of risks, I'm very willing to try whatever it is that you are putting your head out for, and see if that works, because my head is no longer on the cutting block. And if it then works, then they are very open to see if we can then structurally remove it. And removing obstacles like that, removing waste, is the key thing, the key last ingredient that I think is part of what makes things go faster. So summarizing, before I get to my final point, we have the situation where you need to be able to be lazy. You need to have an attitude of, I want to get a lot of stuff done without having to do a lot of work for it. You need to consistently believe that you can do a lot better than you're currently doing. The axis over which you want to start doing better is quality. And it is always quality, and the quality is defined by the metrics of, are you doing things really fast, really cheap, and really well? And really well, for instance, is defined by customers are really happy, or you make a lot of money, or anything that is a good definition. Really fast is probably better than the best that you've usually seen. So I remember a Facebook ad that said something, an early Facebook ad that said something, are you about 10 times as good as the best people you see in the average market? Well, then you can come and be with us. And that's easily said. And it actually just so turns out that most of the time you can do really well. So for instance, what's really fast when reading a book if you're starting in education? Well, I train people. And if I train you, I ask, and this is also a very recent post of mine, I ask that you're smart, because I do not like training people that are not particularly very smart, because it takes much longer. And that's nothing bad about people that aren't smart. I just have a lot of time to spend on my work. And if I'm going to also be training somebody, I want them to be fast. Then I ask them, can you also read fast? And then they typically say yes. So people often say, yeah, I'm both smart and I can read fast. And I'm very willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. But then I'm going to set a demanding goal. I say, here's a book. It's a very important book. It's called Clean Code. It has like, what, 200 something, 300 pages. Read it in a week. And you'll see that all the students that actually start reading it, and they read it in a week, are not only those students that are capable, they're also those students that are willing and that they really want to do the stuff that you're wanting to do for them. So from a leadership perspective, finding the people who really want to go really fast is also where you probably want to invest most of your energy. Then number 4, you should change from the inside. And number 5, the biggest thing that you're going to be facing is fear, is obstacles generated by fear. And all of these can be easily removed if you have a leader that protects, leads, and helps. And I hope that it makes sense now that a leader doesn't necessarily mean the boss or the CEO. You can be the leader. Anybody who is actually willing to protect the pack, lead the pack in the right direction, and make sure that the pack actually benefits from their presence in the perspective of the pack, is going to be a leader. They're going to be a servant leader. And that brings me to the definition, which is my favorite definition of what a servant leader is. And it comes from a PhD thesis, which was made by Inge Nuiten, which is a Dutch woman. And she said, a servant leader is someone who puts the interests of others first. They have the wisdom to see what is needed, the capacity to do something with it, and the courage to act accordingly. This means that if you have a servant leader within any organization, within any capacity, within any role, you should have all 4 of these. Both the desire to help others and put their interests first. You need to have enough wisdom to figure out what is the right thing to go for. You need to have the capacity to actually pull everybody forward, to show them the right way and to show them the results. And you need to be the one who dares face the danger so that nobody else needs to. And as you do that, you can be a servant leader, and you will see that people will start following you wherever you point, as long as it keeps on working. This is why I think servant leadership is a term. servant leadership, I think, is a term that derives from what works in organizations in trying to achieve value in any kind of a hierarchical pyramid. You want to have people that make sure that the disarray, the fear, the collective memory, and also the need for following somebody who knows where to go is all fulfilled. It can be on a grand level, it can be on a small level. I think the right way to do things is statistically backed up now by a significant amount of data. And I can talk for hours, probably dozens of hours, about why certain things are good and why certain things are not good. What I think is truly important is that you figure out for yourself what you think is good, how you can show others to do it, and how you can figure out any kind of a chaotic situation, what is the right first step to take, and then take everybody along and make sure that you grow. And I think if you follow this recipe, you will see that you will get people along. Thank you for your time. Sat, if there's any questions, I think it's time to talk now.
Yeah,
I will start slacking off.
I haven't seen any in the chat. Yeah, I'm just scrolling through. I don't see any, but happy to open up to our wonderful group tonight. Got any questions for Frank? We've got.
I'd really love somebody to point out to me why I'm horribly wrong, or ask me any questions, or tell me, or ask me anything. I love just chatting about this whole thing, which is how do we get great results.
It really does. Trust me, I've been in the course with him. Go, Jeff.
Hi, Frank. Thank you very much. Music to my ears. So I work in the kind of lean space in manufacturing and service, although I did work in software development years ago. And everything you've talked about there tonight, or most of it, I've read about in the lean world. So Mr. Shingo, you may have heard of him, had a little mantra going back to I think it probably was the 60s or the 70s. And his mantra was easier, better, faster, cheaper. So
awesome.
Exactly to what you've said. And I've actually had slides and presentations where I talk to people about making the work easier. And I've got a picture of a guy in a hammock. And I have to say to them, I'm not talking about smoking Havana cigars and going for a power nap, but it's the same kind of idea that you're talking about there. So delighted to hear what you're saying tonight. It certainly resonates with my own experience, and I would certainly agree with that 100%.
Yeah, well, thank you for your comment. I'm really glad to hear that it also has an equivalent in the lean space. I know that currently it's one of the two major topics on the mind of both Ken and Jeff, which is that there's two major topics. So the first topic on their mind is that I think something like 70% of Scrum teams don't deliver on a weekly basis even, and they think that is not good. And they said with the new release of the 2020 guide, we hope to give you enough that we can help the community of Scrum Masters stimulate the workforce to deliver at least once a week. And the other thing that they are currently combating a lot is what was first called California laid-back hippie agile, which is what you were saying as the hammock with the big cigar. And I think you're spot on. I think that's those are two things that are so commonly mistaken. Making the work easier has nothing to do with trying to do nothing. It has to do with trying to get as much stuff done with as little effort as possible. And frequently when I talk to people and I say, we can do 10 times as much stuff, what they hear is we need to work 10 times as hard. Whilst what I'm trying to say is we should make the work about 50 times easier, so you spend a fifth of the time getting 10 times as much stuff. So yeah, really great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Frank? Yeah, feel free to unmute or
Oh,
drop
yeah,
it in the chat if you want me to ask it. I don't mind.
Am I still mute? No, I'm unmuted, but
Oh, yeah, you're good.
can you hear me?
Ray.
Right,
I
cool,
hear you,
cool.
Ray.
Hey, cool. Hey, yeah, thanks for that. I'm just wondering, I mean, with your example around, reading a book and say, well, putting an artificial deadline around that. I mean, deadlines are, there's just a line in the sand, effectively, right? That's where it stems from. But
Sure.
obviously, it raises the question. I mean, if people have the capability to consume it, at a certain speed, that's fine. But it obviously raises the question: is it even sustainable, right? As a small term effort, it makes perfect sense. But
Yeah.
it does come with. I mean, anything you do comes with the price, as it were. So how did
Yeah.
it pan out?
Okay, so that is actually an amazing question. Thank you very much. So what I typically do is I start out with a sort of an obstacle to see who actually wants this thing, right? So what I usually offer when I start training people, I usually train people for free if they're actually passionate, right? Because I'm not a pro teacher. I'm a pro developer. I make my money with developing. I try to help people. I try to improve the way that they view the world. I'm trying to improve their lives because that works well with me. You can say it's karma. You can say it's my life mission, but I try to make people's lives better because I care. What I've also seen is that there's many people who say that they want stuff, yet they're not willing to do anything for it. So what I usually do is when I set it up is I give you 1 or 2 hurdles to take that are significant but exceptionally doable, right? So reading a book in 1 week, unless you have serious reading problems, in which case I would find another task. So that's also why I said I first check if somebody has the capabilities to do the task. And if they have a task that they can do, then what I do is I give them a serious task, something that would require effort. It would require diligence. And if they finish the task with diligence, you will know that they want it. And as soon as I know that somebody wants it, they stop being in the general category of people who say that they want it, and they start falling into the category of people who actually want it. And people that actually want to learn something, I've noticed it's very easy to tell people who actually want to learn something, you know what, you can slack off as long as and as hard as you want. I will provide you with all the knowledge and all the skills and all of the training and exercises that you can get for usually about 6 months. I can usually, when I start training somebody from scratch, I can give you about 6 months at the very least of training and exercises. And you could do them for as long as you want until you drop, or you can do none of them. And what I usually see is that the number of people that go past the first hurdle is a very small percentage, actually. There's much more people that say that they want stuff than the amount of people that actually are willing to do the work for it. And all of the people that actually go past the first hurdle, there's, I would say, maybe 30% or so that actually gets past the second hurdle at some point, where I don't actually set a deadline for them, but I actually just observe, how are you doing, right? I give you freedom. But first I give you a deadline, then I give you freedom. And as I figure out what their speed is, I start making a slightly challenging schedule for them. And a slightly challenging schedule always means that they'll have to figure out either a way to get it done much quicker than they did before, or they'll have to work quite a bit harder, and I'll keep in touch with them. So I'll spend time getting involved in how are you doing personally? Are you stressed? Are you not stressed? Are you feeling good? Are you not feeling good? Are you learning something? Are you not learning something? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? And are you asking the right questions? I'll try to stimulate my students to figure out, are they understanding what I'm saying? I'll try to pose interesting conundrums. And Sath might have remembered this, where I tried to ask, okay, give me an example from your own personal space. Okay, what has happened with you in the last week? Okay, how could you apply this to that? Or how does this actually apply? Or how does this new skill that you've just learned, or this new knowledge that you've just gained from a book, how does that apply to your situation? And then what I typically try to do is I try to push people to use their imagination rather than to accept the reality that is presented to them, right? So not only do I ask, how can you apply something that you know to a situation that you've encountered? I also ask, so what would be the best solution? And then I ask, how could we possibly get there? And I let people design their own experiments and run those. And what you would know and what you would see is that those people that get past the first two hurdles, those people that accept the challenge and actually want to do it, they get past all of the hurdles. And it's because of investing time as a teacher into your pupils, into understanding where they are, how far they're going to go, and how quickly they're going to go, and making their work environment, their learning environment, both safe but also challenging. I don't know what your experience has been there, Sath. Could you speak to that?
Sorry, I was distracted in the background. Run that past me again.
The thing is, I ended up saying what I tried to create is a learning environment that is both safe and challenging.
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Is that what you're asking
on the
me?
tongue
Yeah,
there.
yeah, 100%. So yeah, just briefly on that then. So casting my mind back to when I did the Scrum at Scale with you, I think the kind of environment where you're learning some quite sort of deep, you're going quite deep on ideas, and you're doing a deep dive and really exploring that, especially when we did the pattern stuff, right? So that's really good. But thinking about how that applies to you and trying to apply that in your context and thinking about what that means to you and trying to use that stuff is really powerful. And I think that for me is the benefit of doing that type of thing in that kind of environment with someone like yourself, who you're a practitioner. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. There you go. Right.
I also really liked that at some point you came back and you were like, hey, you know what? I got this new position and I'm going to do this and this. It was really,
if you're not going to
really
apply
fun.
it, try to make it work for you, then that's the only way to truly learn, right? That's what to me, that's what it looks like. It's the application of it. Theory is great, but the application of it to solve the problem you're trying to solve is where the magic happens.
So do you feel that answers your question a bit, Ray?
Yeah, no, it obviously raises some other questions, but that's, what are your fundamental assumptions around that? That's actually, I mean, I get it to some, I mean, it makes sense, but, you always have to ask the second question. So what assumptions are you making that's actually the right approach? And you don't have to answer that question, but that's something that plays in, in my head, because it sounds very...
So assumptions about which particular topic, about my students, about the material, or about reality?
The approach in general, right? So you could draw parallels with, for example, like army or,
Yes.
a fraternity or something like that. There's always an initial hurdle that you need to go past before you become, before, you're accepted, right? And the question is really, is that, it might work, right? It all depends on the context, it depends on the people. So maybe for what you're looking for, and also in the people that you're working with that you're looking for, this might be the right approach. So it's kind of figuring out, hey, did you explore other options? What's happening in that space?
Right. So my base assumptions, there's a couple of different base assumptions based on the environment in which I'm in. So with students, for instance, or potential students, my base assumption is always there is a big difference between wanting something and desiring something. And it is, I think, fairly universal that people desire stuff. Lots of people desire lots of stuff. I mean, it'd be great if I were able to both play as an advanced musician, fly airplanes and helicopters, and drive amazing other motorcycles, and be able to be physically fit and able to do all the sports. It'd be great to do all of those things. However, I can't. Right? I have a limited learning speed. I can't do all of the learning at all points in time. So at any point in time, I need to make choices. And I've noticed as a teacher that there is a huge difference between people that have made the choice that they're going to invest their time and effort into learning, and those that have not. And to me, I have made my choice that if I invest my time for free into students, then I want them to have made some kind of a choice to actually learn.
Okay, no, that sounds fair enough. I mean, that kind of, that gives the full
It-
picture as to
in
why
the
you would
work
take that
area,
approach. Yeah.
Yeah, in the work area, I have a couple of different assumptions. There's a couple of them, so I'll try to list them for you. One of my base assumptions is that people like adding value both to their organization and to society. It's great. I have reasons for believing this, but I would say in the end, it comes down to one of my base assumptions. People like working and adding value to their organization and to society. What I've also figured out is that most everybody that I know likes learning new stuff. What I've also learned is that most everybody does not like, and particularly in organizations that are very strict on this, to get severely punished or be threatened to be severely punished. Even the threat of severe punishment gets people to say, okay, I won't do it then. And another thing that I've noticed is everybody in a work situation wants to be treated as though they can add something great to the organization. And I've also noticed that if you start treating people like they can, they will want to. So I would say that is a thing that I've noticed, but I assume it about almost everybody. And then lastly, I make the baseline assumption that almost everybody would like to be able to do at least the same amount of stuff with less effort. And if you take those into account, I think you can get the entire presentation that I gave before and see that each of those steps builds on one of those pillars. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it absolutely does. So yeah, cool.
Cool.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Thanks.
Is there anybody else that has any burning questions or wants to know anything or has a comment?
I've encouraged our group to tap into your expertise and knowledge, as I have been privileged to do in the past. While we have you, but I'm going to start asking you some questions. You know I will.
I also noticed that Sheila has unmuted.
Okay, I can't see everyone. Hi, Sheila.
I missed part of it because I've been getting some interruptions, but have you noticed that, well, let's see. I've heard that in the military, when they need to figure out a difficult task, they give it to the laziest person in the group because that person will find out the most efficient way to do it. Does that sort of hold with what you're saying?
Absolutely. That was my first point. Try to solve things in as lazy a way as you can do it, because then you'll get it done as efficiently as possible, right? Because there is also another way of seeing this, and this was famously presented in an XKCD strip. I don't know if you know XKCD. Okay, maybe not. I'll assume the silence means no. XKCD is a comic strip which is written by a physicist, and it appeals particularly to nerds like me. And one of the great perspectives that they gave was that there's another way to start optimizing something, and it's if you make it a game. And both of those help in finding optimal strategies, because there's if you make something a game, you'll eventually find people that want to try to game the system and get the best possible result out of it. And this is also what gamers are particularly known for. And this particular comic actually pointed that out. And it just so happens that I'm a very lazy gamer. So yeah, I like that. Are you still with us, Sheila?
Yeah, I like the idea of making work a game where you try to figure
it's fun.
yeah, figure out the easiest way to make it as little work as possible so that you can go back to having fun.
Yeah, or even better, which is how can I find elements of my work that I find so interesting that working on them seems like playing, which to me, for instance, in the software world is continuous delivery as a big facet of that for me.
Yeah, continuous delivery, when you talk about continuous delivery, are you talking about into production or into a pre-production environment?
Production only. The rest doesn't matter.
But there's some things you really can't deliver continuously into production.
Yeah, that's definitely true. You don't want to deliver pacemakers into production. You do not want to deliver rockets into production, and you do not want to do nuclear power plants with continuous delivery. There's some methods that are not good for having even the slightest error in production. That is absolutely true. However, way more things than you would think are actually very, very okay with having exceptions and problems in production, if only you were more able to detect, resolve, and fix them very quickly.
I would really love to know how they got down to a 15-minute delivery of a coupon or promotion into production.
Yeah. I mean, so for instance, to give you an example right now, I'm working at a bank, and we are creating a new microservice landscape. And one of the first things that I noticed was that I would say over 99% of work that was being done was stupid work. So what we would start with a contract of a service, and most of the work that was being done was then it could be derived from the contract. So there was auto-generated code. The project had a similar structure every time. So what I started doing is I started automating the creation of projects, the generation of code, and we've gotten a deployment of 6 weeks down to 2 days now. I believe I scored 1.5 just the other day. So just extend that further and further. Try to find places where you do stuff that you really shouldn't be doing because it happens over and over and over again, or because you can configure it, or it has sensible defaults, or any of the potential ways in which you can figure out structures, repeating structures in your work, and eliminate them by automating the repetitiveness. And as you keep on doing that, the time to implement things goes down, 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 and down. And it is then my goal to have the zip lists of microservices, of which we have, I think something like 30% of our services are like that. They used to take about 6 weeks, and I want them to go down to below 2 minutes. Get them from scratch into production. So from not implemented, nobody has worked on it except that we have the contract, up all the way into that they're deployed into production should take about 2 minutes. And that's doable. It's doable if you are good at pattern recognition and automating it. And fortunately, I'm in a position to do so now because I'm a developer and automating stuff is my work. So that's great.
So when you implement something that quickly, do you do any kind of testing to make sure you haven't broken anything that uses whatever you're changing?
Obviously, yes.
Okay, a lot of people say they don't bother with testing, so that's why I asked. It's not
you should do testing, but you should do smart testing, right? It's one of my inspirators and a person that I connect with quite a bit as well is James Copeland, and he has written a very interesting piece on unit testing, which is very insightful because it raises a number of questions that the people who are big advocates of doing massive amounts of testing don't actually raise. And one of the biggest insights that I got was a couple. There were I would say 2 or 3 major insights. So the one is, if your test never breaks, or if your test when it breaks does not tell you that something has gone wrong in production, you're probably testing the wrong thing. Right? So if your test breaks and it doesn't mean anything, then why are you testing it? The second one is, when you do testing, it shouldn't be that when you do testing, you're all of a sudden wearing the smart hat. Right? When you're doing your coding, you should also be wearing the smart hat. Right? So when you're making your product, invest your attention, your intelligence, and your diligence into creating a great product. It will make sure that you do not have to do all sorts of stupid tests. Right? Pair programming is a great example of using diligence and attention to create higher quality stuff. Lastly, another thing that I've learned over the years is that if something works and has been proven to work, don't test if it actually still works. So I've seen people write tests to see if the database does what a database should be doing. That is not up to you to test. If you have a proper database, it will function the way it's supposed to function. If you think that it isn't functioning the way that it should be functioning, you're probably the one doing something bad. Right? So use smart tests at smart places and at the right times. And then when you automate the hell out of something like that, then think about which tests are useful if this has proven to be the right way to automate and automatically generate all of this. And a lot of tests are not the right tests, and some tests are the right tests. So as I said, in the 30% case, I would probably only add a test that says, are you properly deployed and functional now? Right? Because that would test that I've actually set up the environment and that everything that I've actually instructed to automatically generate has actually finished properly. Right? That's about the only test I would do in the 30% case. In the 70% case, I would have a whole slew of options of testing whether or not the thing that I was supposed to be making is actually also the thing that I made. But what I do not do is that I do not write 60 tests that test if each and every unit of programming that I've made are good. And there's good reasons for this, because there's statistics that say that in, for instance, writing of code, 7 out of 100 lines of code will have some sort of a bug or malfunction. Right? And then you can think to yourself, how many lines of code have I written to write my tests? And for every 100 codes of lines of tests that you have written, you probably have about 7 with a malfunction in them. So what you want to do is instead try to focus more effort to filter out these kinds of malfunctions and build in quality into the way that you produce what you're producing. And when you've automated something properly and you've proven that it works, then don't try to automate, don't try to test your automation. Instead, try to add the pieces that the humans add to it. Because every way you turn it, humans turn out to be fairly flawed in how they do their work. And that should be acceptable. It should be built into the process that is acceptable to make mistakes. It's acceptable to be wrong. We can inherently not always do great, and it's fine. That doesn't matter. What matters is that when you do something and you put in due diligence and you think about, okay, what is going to be the outcome of my work, and you test if the outcome is correct. And if you do it like that, you will write surprisingly fewer tests and have much greater outcome of when a test actually fails. It'll be much more valuable. Does that make sense to you?
I disagree with it, but I understand the perspective.
Well, that's great. I like it. I like that you disagree. I would very much hope that you try to find, I've posted a link to the piece, and I think James is much more articulate about it than I am. And I hope that you get inspired to read it. And if you still disagree with it, look me up and convince me. I'm always open to good arguments. This is just one perspective.
Post the link.
On LinkedIn.
The link is on LinkedIn. Okay.
Like it's a post of mine like 3 or 4 posts ago. So not that long ago.
Okay. I'll let Sath ask some questions now, because it looks like he wants to.
No, I'd always amused when Frank gets into his, I like to be challenged, because what I like about Frank is he's quite comfortable having a robust debate. We've had a few. No, it's good. No, I was also encouraging the group around the fact that I've always been a fan of your passion for measurement and performance and metrics. And Dana was interested to learn a little bit more. So she did want to know a little bit more about this. And I thought her question was a little bit sort of general. But I'd quite like to, I guess, give the group the opportunity to hear a little bit from you on on metrics, because I know it's such a passion of yours.
Right. Yes.
So, it's something just to help them, the way you think about these things and the kind of things that they ought to be thinking about when trying to choose metrics and measures, etc., to understand improvement and performance and how things are improving, etc., would be really good, because we've got about 10-15 minutes. So
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a perspective, and
that's right.
so we did a structured literature review of published metrics in the Agile space, and we came to the conclusion that most of them suck, and they suck for different reasons, and they have different fatal flaws, and it has to do with a couple of different aspects, which I'm actually in the finishing stages of publishing an article on. So I hope to get that pushed through when it's important enough on my backlog. But it's the one of the most important things that I see going wrong. There's I would say two, is that you see a lot of metrics that are focused on an in-between product, an in-between result. You could say, for instance, we have very high velocity, and I could say, okay, cool. What does that actually mean? Are you going fast? Well, if you're doing it right, the answer is yes. Turns out that in a lot of situations where I am, the answer actually is just no. People just give higher estimations to the same stuff. This is called story point inflation. It's a very well-known thing. You could say we optimize over business value. And then I would ask, okay, that's very cool. How is business value defined? And you get back, well, we have a business person and they just suck a number out of their thumb, and then that's the business value. Well, that doesn't mean anything to me. So when I look at metrics, I always try to find metrics that are expressed as a non-arbitrary number that counts anything that you are very interested in. So try to find something that you can count, and has a direct reflection in results that you've produced, right? And this could be, you could say that's very difficult. What I would then say is try to find a few key metrics that convey the most information about the topic that you're interested in. And I found that a couple of the metrics that are the most interesting fall into a couple of categories. One seems to be how well is your group doing mentally. One seems to be how efficient are you actually spending your time and producing material, which is for the lean people amongst our group called flow efficiency in lean. And the article that I wrote with Jeff about that is called process efficiency. So how well do you actually spend your time delivering product? And how much time are you waiting or multitasking is very, very key in there. You could say that customer satisfaction is something that you could count. The number of people who give you a 9 or a 10. For instance, a net promoter score is a thing that is very countable. You can do your calculations on that. And each and every one of these metrics gives a singular dimension. And what you want to do when you do this is you want to create a dashboard that is free of opinion. And then what you want to do is you want to use that dashboard to generate an opinion. This is crucially different from, for instance, a product that I've seen used in an organization that I worked with once, where they introduced a product that was called Agility Health Radar. And maybe some of you have actually worked with that as well. And it probably has its place. However, what I noticed with Agility Health Radar was that it presented a ton of metrics in a nice rounded out perspective, and it gave you a vision, except that all of the metrics were focused on answering questions in a survey by the people that were making it. And then the questions was the input for creating a pretty picture. But that suffers from a fatal flaw, because it does not unveil whether or not you're doing well. It just unveils what you think of yourself. Does that make sense to you, Sath?
I was looking for your process efficiency paper, and I've just shared it with the group in the chat.
Awesome.
I think you should read it. Right, what's your question?
Well, what I'm saying is it's important to focus on output, to focus on results that are generated.
Yeah.
It's important to focus on objective, countable facts instead of opinions.
100%.
And it is important to make sure that what your metric means is very simple to understand and simple to explain. And lastly, it is important to make sure that when you use metrics, that you use few metrics that are very telling for what you want to actually research, what you want to see.
Yeah.
Now, depending on what organization you're in, story points could be an absolutely magnificent way to do any kind of counting. But for most organizations that I've been in, story points are next to worthless. I can get into big discussions with everybody if you're very interested in the story points. The key takeaway there is if story points are not based on real work, but based on who screams the loudest, is the most dominant, or is the most extrovert, then it doesn't mean anything. What it then does is then story points is a reflection of the opinion of a single person instead of the reflection of the perception of the group of the work to be done. If you get the first, then story points are useless. If you get the latter, story points can be very valuable, right? If you gather opinions like Agility Health Radar does, no matter how beautifully you can depict them, that does not tell you anything about how well you're actually doing on an objective measure. Right? So that's very interesting. And lastly, if you're going to be doing metrics, you should know the domain of your metric. So for instance, it is very interesting to know that if you take a look at a major software organization, this is where I know most of my metrics, but if you are good at your particular domain, please delve into it deeper. But for a major software organization, there was a guy, and he researched what is the percentage of time that people are working, that your developers are working. And then they said, well, how is working defined? And then they say, well, let's loosely define it as that they are staring at their screen, at least that they can see their screen directly when we go there. So what they did is they surveyed the area, and they did so a couple of times. And it turns out that people are working about 30% of the time. And it turns out that if you work about 30% of the time, you're doing a pretty good job. Other interesting metric. For instance, number of hours worked per week. This is a metric that almost everybody knows. We all know how many hours we usually work per week. Most of us work about 40 hours a week. And then you could ask yourself, so why do we actually work 40 hours a week? And the answer turns out to be because Ford ran an experiment in his factories, where he said, what is the optimal number of hours to get factory workers to work on my factory belts, on my production belts, where I create these automobiles, so that they can do so for a prolonged period of time and the productivity is highest? The answer turns out to be 40. Non-surprisingly, when you do something that is intellectually stimulating and that requires you to be creative, that's a different type of work. And the optimum for that type of work turns out not to be at 40 hours a week. So why are we working 40 hours a week? Well, because everybody is doing it. Well, that's great, but that's not the highest output. The highest output turns out to be somewhere in the low 30 hours a week area. Okay, very interesting. So what can you do with that? Well, you can experiment, right? You can devise a very interesting experiment, which I did one time when I led a team where I find it very difficult to find them to find a way to get them motivated. So what instead I did, of getting them motivated, I combined the metric that how many hours should you be working per week and what is the productivity, the knowledge that that should probably be around 30 and that would maximize productivity. I combined that with the fact that they had no intrinsic drive to improve yet, and that I wanted them to become more lazy. So what did I do? Well, I said, okay, we're going to do an experiment. I'm going to tell you how much you have to finish this week. And when it's done, you can go home. And we'll keep on paying you. If you've done 40 hours, you can also go home. That's fine. If you finish it in 30, you can go home after and have a free Friday with your wife and kids. Finish it in 20, you have 2 free days. Finish it in 10, maybe we'll talk next week if we can double the amount of work we stuff in your week. Guess what happened? It's exactly what you would expect. They figured out ways to be lazy. They made sure they had a lot of time. And I kept on pushing the boundaries until we figured out a decent optimum where they would work about 32 hours every week and get 8 hours off, but get paid. Everybody wins, right? In my organization, they got the maximum output of this team. The team produced much more in the same amount of time. The team had more time off. And the team was way more now intrinsically motivated to find new ways to be lazy. Because every time that they would, they'd get time off that week. It was fun.
Right.
Okay.
We've got a few minutes and I'll do the wrap up. Any other questions for Frank? Do you want to stop sharing your slides now? So
Yeah, sure.
Everyone then.
I have another comment.
Sure.
Based on the way you're describing metrics, I'd say they're a subset of statistics. And you know what Mark Twain said about statistics? Are you familiar with that quote?
Maybe, maybe not. I hope to be informed.
There are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics.
I love that. That's great.
I especially liked when you talked about the people who are writing a survey so that they can pat themselves on the back. I really don't like surveys because usually you have to choose one of their predetermined answers, none of which actually fit what I'm actually thinking. So they're useless to begin with.
No, there's actually a hidden evil in surveys that you might not be aware of. There's a very interesting hidden evil in surveys that is used to get people to conform to opinions that they might otherwise not have. And it is described in the book Influence, which has been very interesting to me. And it turns out that you can do a survey where you, for instance, ask people, do you feel that the environment deserves more support? And most people would say yes to that. I mean, some people say no, that's also fine. And it turns out that if you do a survey like that, and then about 5 weeks after that, you ask people to make a significant sacrifice in order to benefit the environment. The case study that I'm talking about here was, I believe, something like, can we put up a giant billboard in your backyard? And compliance to that within the group that had not gotten a survey was extremely low, something in the 1 point something %. However, in the group of people that had answered yes on the survey, that they thought that the environment could use a little bit of extra support, compliance was something in the area of, I think, what was it, 5 to 7%? So
those were the people that completed the survey instead of when the questions get ridiculous, they just close and opt out.
Yeah, that's a different group. But there is an underlying mechanism at work here, which is that if you get people to say something in writing, then they are mentally committed to that, which is called commitment in psychological terms. And in marketing terms, you then have another principle, which is called consistency, which is that people would like to be consistent with the things that they've publicly said. and particularly things that they've publicly committed to, like for instance in a survey. And interestingly enough, if you want to learn something about how brainwashing actually works, for instance, how they did brainwash American soldiers and Chinese camps to betray their home country, it actually builds on this commitment and consistency principle, where they would get prisoners to publicly state that America was horrible, and do so time and time again, and write essays why their home country is horrible. And they do this so many times until the psychological effect of the prisoner is now that they start believing this because they've publicly uttered those statements. And that commitment and consistency principle is at work in a lot of different places. And one of the places where it is currently being used to manipulate public opinion and what we can get the public to do is in surveys. So yeah, surveys. I'm also not a big fan.
I think we could talk about surveys all night and how they're flawed. We do a lot of surveys in my org, and I think we've got what I call survey fatigue. You know, it's like, you know, they keep coming thick and fast. I'm thinking, who's completing these things? You know, who's got the time? Who's got the motivation? Listen, we've got a few minutes left. I think I'm going to spare you there. I think that was well done on the. I think the longest round of Q&A we've probably had for a while. So well done to you, Frank. And yeah, just to say thanks for joining us. It's always good to see you and good to hear from you. I really enjoyed your session, and I think, yeah, there's a few things I'd like to follow up on, just around things that are going on in my own day to day. So, you know, thinking about the application of your stuff as always. So well, thanks for joining, and yeah, a round of applause for me. Anybody welcome to virtually or whatever. So no, thanks for your time again, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime in the future. And thanks to everyone for joining and great participation. So just to wrap up in the usual. Sorry, mate. What?
If I may wrap it up for myself as well.
Yeah, please.
I liked being here. I thought it was a very engaging discussion at the end as well. I would like to invite anyone, both here right now and anyone who is seeing the recording, to look me up if you ever have any kind of a question or would like to discuss something, and particularly if you vividly disagree with me, to look me up and try to convince me of why I'm stupid and wrong, because I love those. Oh,
we know you love a good debate. And you like people to tell you why you're wrong. No, I do like that. And to be honest, that's one of the things I always remember fondly about, you know, training with you. So thanks for that. Just quickly to wrap up, folks, that's our last session for March. So hope you enjoyed our 3 offerings this month. Next month, we've got the 2 in the diary. I think you've seen the calendar. We've got one in with Sheila Walsh joining us from Ireland. So she'll be talking about diversity in practice. So that should be really good, very topical, very current. Sheila's also kindly offered us a discount on a program that she's running over April, which is called diversity. So basically not the obvious stuff. I forgot exactly what she called it. But it sounds really, really good. She's given us a generous offer. But if you are interested in that, please reach out to Donald and I, and we'll basically connect you with Sheila. So it's a kind of exclusive little offer that she's making available to this group and our community. So it's very good of her. And then, as I'm sure many of you seen, we've got Kim Morgan's awesome session in the diary for the end of April. So that's very heavily subscribed. So that's going to be a great session with Barefoot Coaching's chief exec. We've also got plans for lots of good stuff in May and June. We did get one of the sessions live in June with Francis Lalliman. He's a fine gent and based out in Belgium, so he'll be talking with us on exformation. I've got a couple of really exciting things for you, just trying to dot the T's and cross the I's and all the rest of it, and the other way around, as you know. And we'll get those live for you soon. And yeah, thanks again for joining. And you know, if you do celebrate Easter, have a tremendous Easter weekend. And we'll see you again soon, hopefully. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for your time. Thanks, folks. Take care. All the best. Thank you.